Do you want to have more control over your internet connection, like blocking different websites or even categories of websites? Well, today, that's what we're going to do. Stay tuned. So you might have many different reasons for why you may want to filter websites that you can have access to from your network. In my case, I have kids that use the internet, and I want to make sure that they don't have access to inappropriate material. What I recommend for this is Open DNS. I've been using Open DNS for this for quite some time, and it really works well. So today, I'm going to show you several different ways on how you can set it up and make it really hard to subvert. But first, I gotta pay some bills, so check out today's sponsor. Is your copy of Windows 10 unactivated? Well, it doesn't have to be, because with today's sponsor, VIP SCD Key, you can get a valid Windows 10 license for under $20. Stop dealing with that stupid watermark on the desktop, the valid license for Windows 10. Also, with an activated copy of Windows 10, you can upgrade to Windows 11 for free. Just go to the link in the description below and pick up a valid Windows 10 license key. During checkout, use the code CYBERCPU for a 25% discount. Once you have your key, go to your activation settings in Windows 10 and click on the link that says Change Product Key. Enter the product key you just purchased and hit Activate. Now you don't have to deal with that stupid watermark that come with running an unactivated copy of Windows 10. Now, on with the video. So here's the thing. I've been using OpenDNS for years, and it has worked flawlessly. I have very few bad things to say about it. However, there is one thing, but I'll talk about that later. It has a really easy to configure front end, and it's relatively simple to set up on your computer. It's also relatively easy to set up network-wide. But here's the thing though, kids are smart. It doesn't take them long before they figure out how they can play with the network settings and change the DNS servers to subvert your parental censorship. When I originally set up OpenDNS, this was my main concern. So my goal was to create a system that I couldn't get around. I figured if I can't get around it, then my kids don't have a chance. So stay tuned to the end of the video and I'll show you how to set that up. But let's stop wasting some time and jump on the computer and I'll show you how to get this working. Okay, so we're gonna be doing all this from Windows 11, but the majority of the time we're gonna be in our browser, so this should work the same on any computer that you use it on. But the first thing that you need to do is go to OpenDNS. And for OpenDNS, for home use, it's absolutely free. In fact, even the Family Shield is free. This is a free service and it's as open as it says it is. So what you gotta do is go over to OpenDNS Home and hit sign up. And from here, you would just fill out all your information and get a free account. Now, I already have an account, so I'm not gonna go through the whole process of creating an account, but I'll go ahead and let you do that. The one complaint that I do have that I kind of hinted at earlier in the video is their password rules are insane. And the amount of different characters and numbers that you have to use. See, the problem is once you set this up, you really don't have to mess with it. It just works. So you really only have to log into it whenever you want to make adjustments to your content censorship or your content restrictions and things of that nature. So you log into it so infrequently that it's really easy to forget your password. So I find myself having to reset my password almost all the time. So anyway, just keep that in mind. You might want to store your password somewhere, but for right now, since I'm not going to create an account, I'm just going to go ahead and click sign in. And I'm going to sign into the account that I already have. Now, of course, it's going to be blocked so you can't see my login credentials. Okay, so once you're logged in, you come to this page right here. And in fact, you're probably actually going to come to this page and you're gonna have to set up a network. And this network is gonna be based on your external IP address. Of course, mine's gonna be fogged out here, so I don't hand my public IP address out to everyone. But I have a dynamic IP address, so if you're watching this video later on, it doesn't really matter because someone else will have that IP. So in order to set up your network, you're gonna have to open up another web page. And then what I do typically is just on Google type, what is my IP, and hit enter, and then it will give you your public IP address right here. And of course, mine is going to be fogged out, but yours won't be. So go ahead and take that IP address and then enter it in here and hit add this network. And then once you do add that network, you'll go ahead and click on it and it'll give you all your web content filtering. And from here, as you can see, I essentially just filter out pornography because I have kids and I don't want my kids to go and see inappropriate stuff. And in fact, I even kind of have this fairly liberal in how that's set up. You could go through and you could filter a lot more. In fact, you could filter web spam, you could filter essentially all these different categories of different things. You could even filter humor, which I'm sorry, if you're filtering humor, then you have a really sad life. Just saying, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry for you. But there might be things on here that you really do want to filter. Like for instance, nudity might be a good idea. In fact, it's probably one that I should check, but for right now, I think pornography is okay. But if you go up, if you don't want to have to go and pick each individual category, you can go through here and use their own categories that they have set up. And you can see right here which things are filtered from those individual different categories. So you can go through here and kind of either choose their filtering levels or go ahead and create your own. And then also, if you come down here, there are certain websites that, for instance, if these websites happen to fall into one of these categories, you can unblock them too. So for me, obviously, I have a website in here that I use to download different torrents from. Legal torrents, of course. But with that, unfortunately, they do have explicit advertisements on that website. So it does get blocked under the pornography section. So for that, I had to unblock it using it this way. And then I also added Disney.com in here for a website I wanted to always block. Now, I don't actually block Disney.com. I only blocked it in this video just so I can give you an example later on of what it looks like when you block a website, because I didn't want to be opening up pornography websites on YouTube. You know what I mean? So I decided Disney.com was the next best thing. So now that you have all of this set up, essentially what you do is you go down to your network settings. So for me, I'm going to click on the Start button. I'm going to go into Control Panel. Then from Control Panel, I want to go to Network and Internet, and then Network and Sharing Center. And then go to your Change Adapter settings. And then from there, you want to go to your network adapter. Obviously, you can see I have two here. One of them is for VirtualBox, and it's a virtual network adapter. Don't worry about that one. You're not going to have it on yours. Just go to your primary network adapter that you have connected to your system. Right-click on it and hit Properties. And then from there, you want to click on your IP version 4 and hit Properties. And then right down in this bottom box right here, what you want to change these DNS servers to is the OpenDNS servers. Now, I'll go ahead and show them to you right now. They're 208.67.222.222. And then from there, you want to go to the alternative server, which is 208.67.220.220. And then once you do that, you go ahead and hit OK, and that should be it. You go ahead and close that. Close all of the different windows that you have open. Then you can go back into your browser here. And then for our test, we're going to go Disney, if I can spell it right. And then we're going to click on their website, and there you go. The website is blocked. Now, if you wanted to unblock it, all you would have to do is go in here and delete the website that you want to block. But you could also use this to, perform a lot of practical jokes and things of that nature. Like if your wife likes to play on Facebook, well, you could block Facebook, and that might get you in trouble, but I'll go ahead and leave that up to you. Okay, so this is all well and good, but your IP address right here, it needs to know what your IP address is going to be. And if your IP address changes, it won't be able to apply this filtering to that IP address. So let me show you how to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to open up another browser window, and we're going to go right here to the OpenDNS Dynamic IP Updater client. And you just go ahead and scroll down. I'll go ahead and leave the link to this in the description below. So we're going to download this app right here. If you're on a Mac, they have a Mac version of it, but I'm going to obviously be downloading the Windows version. And then once you download it, unfortunately, Chrome is of course going to block it. So we're going to download the unverified file, and then we're going to open this up, and then we can minimize our browser, and we're going to go ahead and launch this program right here. Go ahead and hit yes. Hit install, and this is just a simple little program that will run in the background and update your IP address whenever it needs to be updated. Now on mine, I've already got this logged onto my account because I had this installed while I was testing this video. So what you're going to need to do is go ahead and log this on to whatever your OpenDNS account is, and it should go through and update your IP address. And then all you have to do is push update now, and it'll update your IP address. And it'll do this on a regular basis. I'm not exactly when the update process is. However, when you close this and you look down here, it is always running in the background. So it's going to be updating your IP address all the time. So that way you shouldn't have to worry about updating it manually. Okay, so you now have OpenDNS functioning on your computer. However, it's only functioning on your one computer. What if you want these DNS settings to affect your entire network? For that, we're gonna need to configure these DNS servers using our router. Now, the router I'm using for this video is one of these right here. If you recognize this router, then you're in the cool kids club. Now, while I don't recommend using a WRT54G anymore, this was the king of routers back in the day. I'm just using this one in this video because I don't want to mess with the router that I'm currently using on my network. However, I do still use the firmware that this router has loaded on it. And in my router today, that firmware is DDWRT. It's an open source alternative to the factory firmware that gives regular consumer routers abilities that you wouldn't even imagine. Now, one of the downsides of doing a video on changing router settings is that no matter what router I pick, it's inevitably going to be different than the vast majority of people who watch this video. So I'm doing this video in DDWRT because, for one, it's the router firmware that I use myself, and the basic fundamentals should be the same even if your router uses a slightly different UI or even a lot different UI. So let's jump back on the computer and I'll show you how to set it up. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is go ahead and go over to our router here. So for that, we need to find out what our router's IP address is. And for that, you're gonna go ahead and open up command prompt and just type ipconfig. And then ipconfig should give you your IP version 4 address, which mine right now is 123. So my default gateway is gonna be 1.1. So that's gonna be our router address. So once you get that, you can go ahead and close this and then go to http://192.168.1.1. And you hit that and it should give you the login screen for your router. And it kind of does. This one here, DDWRT in its factory setup, instead of giving you a login screen, just gives you an information screen. Now you can disable this in the firmware, but I didn't bother. I just used a default version of DDWRT for the making of this video. So the first place that we're gonna wanna go is we're gonna wanna change our DNS options. And for that, we're gonna have to go into setup. Now then, if you wanna start changing stuff, then you have to put your password in. So for that, I'm just going to enter my password real quick. And then once we get into this page, you're gonna go down and you're gonna notice that your static DNS settings are just set to 0. That means it's not gonna use any custom DNS settings. It's just gonna use whatever your ISP provides. Now, that's what we wanna avoid. So what we wanna do is we wanna go to 208.67.222.222, and then we wanna go to our alternative, or our secondary is gonna be 208.67.220.220. Now you can add a third if you want here, but we don't have a third to add, so I'm gonna go ahead and leave that one empty. But once you get to that, you go ahead and hit save, and then you go ahead and hit apply settings. And now when you hit apply settings, unfortunately, I'm using an old WRT54G. So when I hit apply settings, it has to reboot the router. If you're using a more modern router running DDWRT, it won't have to reboot the router after every little change like this. Unfortunately, this is a downside to using an older router like a WRT54G, but I had it to use for this video, so that's why I used it. Anyway, I will jump ahead until it's finished rebooting, and then we'll move on. Okay, so the router settings are done. We're gonna go ahead and hit continue. And from this point, we're gonna go ahead and verify our entries. They're all correct, and that should be good. Now what we're gonna need to do is now we're gonna need to configure the DDNS. What DDNS is it's dynamic DNS service. And what this does is it'll update our OpenDNS to let them know what our IP address is. Now, before, when we just entered this into the computer itself, we downloaded this program right here, this OpenDNS updater. However, if your router supports DDNS services, then I wouldn't set it up that way. I would set this up through your router so you don't have to have a program running on the computer in the background. So the first thing that we have to do before we set up our DDNS service is we have to actually have a DDNS service to set up. So for that, we're gonna go ahead and open another tab and we're gonna go to DNS-O-Matic right here. And DNS-O-Matic is just a service that's associated with OpenDNS, but it can be used for a lot of different services that you would need to update your IP address for. So for this, we're obviously going to be using it for OpenDNS. So all we got to do is go over, click on account, and then it's going to ask you to log in. Now, if you're an OpenDNS user, then DNS Omatic uses the OpenDNS login page. So all you got to do is go ahead and click here to sign in, and it will go through and it will sign you in automatically, especially if your browser is already logged into OpenDNS like ours is. So once it's logged in, you can see right here that you have the service OpenDNS. And what you'll have to do is, I don't think the service is automatically there. I think you have to click add service and then select which service you want to add. And as you can see, it supports way more than just OpenDNS. But you would have to pick OpenDNS for yours in order to set it up. Now, obviously on mine, I don't need to because I already have it set up. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this one from here. But you'll have to set up yours. But essentially, that's all you need to do is just set up the OpenDNS service to let it know that this is what you're actually doing. And then once you do that, you can go ahead and close the web page. And then from our DDNS service here, we can go ahead and go down to custom here. And then from custom, as you can see, some of this stuff is already filled out because I actually already had this set up during the process of testing all the stuff to make this video. So the first line is going to be the DYDNS service or server that you're actually connecting to for the DDNS service. And for that, it's going to be updates.dnsomatic.com. Now, you're going to want to put :443 in because you want to specify the port 443 because that will force it to go through an SSL server. And unfortunately, Dnsomatic does not allow updates on an unsecured server any longer. And I have found that specifying port 443 is more reliable than typing HTTPS at the beginning of this address right here. So I just use port 443. Then the next thing you have to enter in is obviously your username and password, and you're going to use the username and password that you used for OpenDNS. So I'm going to go ahead and type that in real quick. And then go ahead and type in my password. And then the next one is going to be hostname. And for hostname, we want to go all.dnsomatic.com. And then from there, the next line is going to be the URL itself. And now this one here is going to be /nic/update hostname equals. And then hostname equals is essentially going to be your IP address. And that's what this whole thing is going to be finding out. The IP address that this form will automatically add to the end of this URL is what will eventually be what updates our IP address. So essentially all we're doing is we're making a call to this service with this path using this host name to update that IP address, if that makes any sense. Now, on mine, I have to use an external IP check in order to pull my IP address. Now, honestly, if your router is connected directly to a modem that's in bridge mode, I would say no for this because it will pull your IP address directly from what your NAT address is from the router. However, that won't work for mine because my external IP address is actually going to be the IP address of my actual router because I'm double NATed right now. So you're going to want to use an external IP check. And this one right here, it tends to not work a lot. So it probably won't work right now, but hopefully it'll work for you. Let's just put it that way. All right, so once we get to this point, we're going to go ahead and hit save. And then once we hit save, we can go ahead and hit apply settings and it'll go through and it's connecting to the server. Now, it may take a while for it to connect to the server, but ultimately I would stick around and make sure that it works for you. And if it doesn't, like in some cases, like right now, in fact, it worked. So it's going through and it's waiting for the external IP check in order to update the DDNS service. Now, this is the part that usually fails for me, but we can stick around for a minute and see if it won't. Essentially, the website that they're using for these external IP checks is just really slow. And because it's really slow, sometimes it can take a while and sometimes it can actually time out. And unfortunately, it's not that big of a deal because if you use a force update interval of 1 day, then it's going to be doing this every day. So even if it fails a couple of times, then it'll eventually update your IP address on a somewhat regular basis, at least more regular than your dynamic IP address changes. So as we can see, this is taking a while, so I'm not going to stick around and wait for it. And I'm sure you don't want to either. So at this point, your DNS settings with OpenDNS should affect everything on your network. Of course, these settings may not take effect until you actually restart the different devices on your network because they're obviously going to retain the settings that they've had based on the last time they logged into the router. However, there's one slight problem with this configuration. All you have to do is change your DNS settings on your Ethernet card, and just like that, you know, you'll be able to bypass your router's DNS completely. Trust me, kids are a lot smarter than they lead people to believe. However, we have a way to stop that too. So let's jump back on the computer and I'll show you how. Okay, so we're back on here and it looks like we finally got our IP address updated. It did give us an error, and this is an error associated with the external IP check. However, it does seem like it was able to update the IP address. So I guess, you know, even if it gives us an error, it still seems like it worked. So that's good. So anyway, what we can do at this point, we can go back to basic setup. Now, the rest of this video is essentially going to be concentrating specifically on DDWRT. These settings right here, up to this point in DDWRT, were able to be used in other routers. For instance, your router is going to have static DNS settings. At least most routers should. If your router does not have static DNS settings, then throw it out and buy yourself a real router, because every router should be able to control its static DNS. However, some of the settings that we're going to be playing with at this point are going to be probably more advanced than your standard consumer router. So one thing that I highly recommend is DDWRT is a great open source and free operating system for consumer routers. Unfortunately, it only works on a limited number of routers. So you'll have to find out if your router supports DDWRT and find out how to install it through their website. It is definitely worth it. So if you end up having to buy a new router in order to use it, I would highly recommend it. However, let's go ahead and I'll show you what the problem is here. So right now, if we go ahead and open up another web page, I'm going to click on what is my DNS. So if we check our DNS at this point, you'll see that right now we are OpenDNS is our DNS provider. However, if we go down into our start menu here and type in control panel, and this is what any kid or any adult who wants to get around internet censorship, or at least censorship on a specific network, can do. So if you go into properties, this is exactly like what we did before to set up OpenDNS. In fact, our OpenDNS addresses are still there. If we go through and just change these, I'm going to change them to Google, and you know what? We'll do Cloudflare as well. And go ahead and hit OK, and then go ahead and hit close. And then at this point, I'm going to disable, and this you probably don't need to do, but you can disable and re-enable your network connection in order to make sure that it's going to use the DNS settings that you just entered in. Okay, so now that they're there, we can go ahead and close all of this, open up our website, and we're going to hit check our DNS servers again. Now, as it's going through, it's going to find that your DNS servers are now going to be, and there you go. Now we're at Google and Cloudflare. So obviously, from what you can see, we have completely bypassed our entire DNS setup that we have in our router. In fact, if we go over here and refresh Disney.com, look at that. It works. So what we're going to have to do at this point is we're going to have to do a way to get around this. We're going to have a way for our router to force all DNS traffic to go through where you want it to go, not where the person modifying the network properties wants it to go. So for that, we're going to go back into the router. There's a couple settings I want you to change here. You're going to go down and you're going to see this checkbox right here that says forced DNS redirection. Now, essentially, this saves us from having to do it the hard way that we used to have to do it before. The way we used to have to do it is to go into the administration page here and go into commands, and we had to use actual firewall commands in order to do this same feature. But luckily, in later versions of DDWRT, they essentially did all that with one check mark. So that's very nice. So once you check that, you're going to go ahead and hit save just like before, and then you're going to have to go down and hit apply settings. Now, of course, once you hit apply settings, it wants to reboot the router. But if you do this on a more modern router, like I said, it doesn't have to reboot all the time. This is just a limitation within the old WRT54G. So I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead until the restart is done, and then I'll show you what else we need to add. Okay, so now that we're rebooted, our forced DNS redirection has been enabled. However, it's not going to do much for us. Another thing that I should have mentioned is you also need to make sure to check the use Dnsmasq for DNS. And this right here is probably going to be checked by default anyway, so it's not something that you're going to have to change. It's usually the default setting is to have it turned on. But if for whatever reason it's turned off, make sure you turn it back on. So for this, we're going to have to go into services. Then from services, we want to go down into Dnsmasq right here. And obviously, you want to make sure it's enabled, but it should be enabled by default. But we're going to go into the options right here. We're going to add a couple of options. Now, the first one is going to be no-resolv. So you're going to type no, and then you're going to type resolve. It's essentially going to, if you're using a DNS server that isn't allowed, so to speak, a server that we're going to add here in a second, that it simply won't resolve anything. It will just not work at all. It won't feed you back anything. So based on that, now we have to give it the servers that we actually want to use. Now there's another command that you can use right here too, but it's optional, and that's going to be strict order. So it's just going to be strict-order. And what this is going to do is it's going to take the servers you give it next and it's going to run them in a strict order. It's going to run the primary server first. If it doesn't resolve what it wants from the primary, then it will go to the secondary. And it'll do that in that order. Sometimes if you don't use strict order, it can use the secondary or the primary, and it doesn't really necessarily matter in any way. It'll use either of those. But if you use strict order, then it will make sure to do the first one first and the second one second, and it'll do it in that order. So if you have a need for them to go in order, then make sure to write strict order. Then next, we're going to write server equals, and then we're going to enter our primary server for OpenDNS, which is going to be 208.67.222.222, and then we're going to hit enter, and then we're going to go into our secondary server. So that's going to be server equals 208.67.220.220. All right, so once you do that, you can go ahead and hit save, and then at this point you can hit apply, and I don't think it reboots the router on this one. It might. No, it doesn't. Okay. All right, so now all of that should be set. Go back to our setup page, verify that our forced redirection is turned on. It is. So now if we go over to what is our DNS servers, now keep in mind, if we go down here, let's go to control panel, go into network and internet, network and sharing center, to adapter settings, and then we're going to open up the settings for this. As you can see, I am still using Google DNS and Cloudflare as my DNS servers, right? I'm going to go ahead and slide this over to the side right here so you can see it. And then we're going to go ahead and click on our window right here. And now we're going to go ahead and press and to check our DNS servers. Okay, so as you can see here, we still have Google as one of our DNS providers. However, there's one more setting that I forgot about. And unfortunately, I don't know why I forgot about this, but here's the thing. If you go into Google Chrome and you go ahead and hit settings right here, and then from settings in Google Chrome, you want to go into privacy and security, then scroll down to security. And as you can see right here, it says use secure DNS. Now, this is a major problem with this issue. Before secure DNS existed, this would work 100% all the time. However, now you have to disable secure DNS. I'll talk about that a little bit more at the end of the video, but this is unfortunately the only problem with this right here. So if we go back to what is our DNS server, go ahead and refresh, check our DNS again, it should come out as only OpenDNS, and as you can see, it does. I wish I could give you a really easy workaround, but unfortunately, I can't. Secure DNS just looks like regular HTTP traffic to the router, so I haven't been able to find a way to even block it, let alone reroute it. In fact, if you guys happen to know a way, then make sure to mention it down in the comments below. But as of right now, secure DNS is the only flaw in this, and you can disable that in Chrome, and hopefully your kids wouldn't know how to just turn it back on. However, you can't disable it on certain devices that might be using secure DNS to access the internet. These may include smart TVs and other consumer electronic devices that you're trying to filter in the first place. And that's one of the primary reasons why I want to find a way to disable it, so I can force all DNS traffic to go through port 53. Also, the other issue with rerouting DNS is that you need a router that can have more control over your network traffic than your standard consumer router. Now, I'm not saying that you have to use DDWRT like I do. I'm the first one to admit that there's a lot of better options out there, but there's not many cheaper than DDWRT. Personally, I still use it because it's one I've always used. So when you're used to something, you tend to stick with it. But obviously the reason why I started using it in the first place is because it was cheap. But if you'd like to use it, then go check out the DDWRT wiki and see which routers support it. And you should find instructions to how to install it on those specific routers. The router I'm currently using is a Linksys WRT 3200 ACM. It's an older router, but it works really well. So when it comes to DNS, there's a lot you can do with OpenDNS. But if you want to have even more control, then check out this video where I show you how to turn a Raspberry Pi into your very own DNS server. It's an older video, but it's a very good use of a Raspberry Pi. As always, you guys have a great day.